Welcome everybody to episode number 308 of Goulet Q&A, where fountain pens are still a thing. I am Brian Goulet here at Goulet Pens, and today I'm going to be talking about a few different things. What's even the point of flex nib fountain pens? Which pens are good for daily sanitization, like at a hospital type setting? Aftermarket pen roll stops, why we don't see more high-end eyedropper filling pens, and if mishaps while disassembling pens should be covered under warranty, nibs that can be swapped onto a traveler's pen, and I'll be spotlighting the TWSBI Precision Gemini Blue. Should be a good one today. And if I have a pinkish hue to me, that's not the video. I spent a little too much time out in the sun yesterday, and now I'm paying the price. So I don't put on makeup for these things. You're seeing my raw face. So sorry, don't be concerned. It'll go away soon. But anyway, let's get into feedback, shall we? All right, first bit of feedback for this week comes from Sharon Beck. It says, thank you, Brian, for answering my question last week. You're very welcome. I went to my desk and pulled out the 2 boxes of old ink cartridges. They were only barely half full. So I showed last week, if you have old ink cartridges, they may not be full anymore because they will, kind of leach through the plastic over time and sort of evaporate. So anyway, Sharon says, I am thinking that I'll dump out the old ink and use some of the newer, beautiful inks. The tips on sealing the cartridges with a hot glue gun will come in handy. I really enjoy your videos. You're very welcome. I'm glad that tip was helpful. All right, Maximos92 says, I love using Aeroful journals, which I showed last week. It's been my go-to for a while now. Sake's offering of Tomoe River is pretty good too, in my experience, but it's much slicker to write on, so very nib and ink dependent. Okay, I haven't tested like everything on it. I've found it to be somewhat comparable, but to each their own for sure. So you say maybe a little slicker than Tomoe? Okay. Than the old Tomoe, I guess. And then Brad, oh wait, you're talking about Aeroful journal. Sake's offering Tomoe River is good. Is slicker to write on. Oh, okay, you're talking about slicker than the Aeroful journals. Yes, I agree. The Aeroful has more tooth, has more bite to it. I was thinking the Tomoe River from Sake, from the previous Tomoe, those are fairly comparable. But yes, you are correct. I've had the same experience as you. Tomoe is slicker than Aeroful. Both made by the same manufacturer though. And then Brad Steiger-Walt says, Kiwi inks have erasable fountain pen inks. I've used them and they do work. This is news to me. I had not heard about this. So we were talking about Pilot Friction pens last week. If they make any fountain pen ink that is erasable like that. Apparently the Kiwi inks is pigmented and maybe has something similar to the way Friction works. I'm curious how the maintenance of that would work over time and how that all works, but that's news to me. Kiwi is a smaller manufacturer. They don't have distribution set up in the US. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I'll keep that on my radar, but that's kind of neat. So you can go check them out if you're interested in that. And then there was some feedback about ink eradicators. A couple different people pointed them out, and I thought that was really interesting. So I talked about ink eradicators and how, that's kind of the only way to have somewhat of an erasable ink kind of a thing. Truth be told, I wasn't sure how ink eradicators work, so I did a little research on it. They have a few different names out there. Ink erasers is another thing. So they can work with fountain pen ink, but basically there are two different types of ink erasers or eradicators. One was a metal ink eraser. No, I just kind of stole this right off Wikipedia, so you can look this up yourself. Take that for what it's worth. But apparently there used to be like metal ink erasers were essentially like a knife blade where you would like physically scrape off the paper that has the ink on it. That doesn't work as well these days because the paper that we make is kind of different than it used to be. It used to be more like laid paper, like cotton laid paper back in the day. You could scrape it and it wouldn't sacrifice the integrity of the paper too much. These days with wood pulp paper, if you go scraping it away, you're going to make a hole in the paper. So I don't think it would work so well these days. But the chemical ink erasers now are the way they work. So I'm just going to read you the chemical ink eraser thing because I thought it was pretty fascinating. The chemical ink eraser was invented by the German manufacturer Pelikan in the 1930s and was introduced as a novelty in Germany in 1972 under the name Tintentiger, Ink Tiger. Chemical ink erasers break down royal blue ink by disrupting the geometry of the dye molecules in the ink so that light is no longer filtered. The molecules are disrupted by sulfite or hydroxide ions binding to the central carbon atoms of the dye. This is why I'm just reading it off of the article, because I don't understand this chemistry. The ink is not destroyed by the erasing process, but it is made invisible. So it doesn't actually go away, sort of like how the friction ink works. It can be transformed back into visible work with aldehydes. It's a different chemical. The eradicator only works with certain inks. Erasable inks of various colors exist, but royal blue is the most common. After applying the eradicator, erasable ink cannot be applied in the erased area of the paper where the chemicals remain, because it would just erase again. For this reason, eradicators usually include a permanent blue felt tip that allows the user to write in the erased area. I'm assuming that has, some sort of different dye or something, probably like a pigmented type thing. I don't know. But anyway, ink eradicator, that's kind of the thing that can work, but you're limited to royal blue ink. Works really well in school settings, but of course, any fountain pen enthusiast, you're not going to want to forever be limited to royal blue ink. So it's sort of a solution, but sort of not. Ink eradicators just haven't been something very popular. We haven't gotten asked about them. Maybe because when you would use them in a school setting, they're more available in those types of settings. And by the time people are buying from a specialized boutique store like Goulet Pens, you're not using the ink for that purpose. You're using different colors of ink and stuff like that. So I have very little experience with ink eradicators, as a matter of fact. I think I have one here, actually. This is a Monteverde one, but I believe it's the same concept. I didn't remember that I had this there. Otherwise, I probably would have showed it last week. But anyway, if you're interested in some demonstration of this, maybe I'll do it in the future. But there it is. It's kind of like a double-ended thing. So it's like clear on one side, which has the chemical, the sulfite or hydroxide, and then it's got the blue tip on the other side. So I don't know. Maybe I'll have to test that out a little bit. If you're interested, let me know in the comments. All right, then Sharon Wright says, I didn't see the other side of the new paper that showed your test and writing swab. This was of the aerofil. Probably should have included this where I talked about that for a minute. Is there bleed through on the aerofil paper? Also, showing the ink cartridges on a black background makes it kind of hard to see what you're talking about. So that's my background here. Yep, no matter what background I choose, I'm gonna have difficulty showing certain things, but black might not be the best color. So I appreciate that feedback. Maybe I'll test some different ones. But anyway, so I'll show you the paper that I used last week. This is, what I wrote out. I used different things, and I never flipped the paper over. I didn't think to, but here you go. So I flipped it over. So this is where I put it down like super, super heavy and multiple times with the Kakimori. It's like barely starting to want to bleed through. But honestly, for the most part, that holds up really well. There's not really a lot of ghosting. Any writing that I would do on this other side wouldn't compete with anything behind it. So it actually held up quite well, I think, especially for the volume of ink I put on there. So there you go. Hopefully that was helpful for you. All right, that's going to be it for now for the feedback. Let's talk about a couple of new things that we've got. All right, first off, we have the LAMY Safari 2025 Special Editions. So we already had the All-Stars come out, and now we got Safaris. So two of them, actually. We have Dark Dusk and Sunset Coral. So got videos published on both of those earlier in the week. If you haven't seen them already, they launched earlier this week. So be sure to check them out. Same price as other Safaris, just around $30. Extra fine and medium nibs, steel nibs. Nice colors though. The Dark Dusk, I really like this. It's a super dark blue color, maybe a hint of purple to it, but just solid color all throughout. Matching clip, matching trim rings. So it's nice. They went away from like the multicolor color pop kind of a thing. If you were, not wanting that anymore, because they've done that on Safaris and All-Stars. They did a bunch recently. This is more just kind of like straight up Safari. So that one's kind of cool. And then the Sunset Coral looks really nice too. Again, consistent color. This one's a matte finish instead of the shiny like you have on the Dark Dusk. But yeah, both these pens pretty nice. So I think if you are into your typical Safaris, these would be a nice choice if you like the color range on these ones. So if you check out the video that I made earlier, you can see I compare it to some other color, LAMY pens and other, a couple other brand pens too. So you can see how the color compares, because it's sometimes hard to tell in digital, video. And then I also show some inks that pair well with each of these. So check those out. Also have a new pen, the Monteverde Regatta Vega. So this is a new Goulet Pens exclusive. This is a special edition that we have coming from Monteverde. It's the Regatta. It's that big pen that, keeps being made in a bunch of different ways. I wanted to show you because I actually have mine right here. Looks pretty neat. So it's It's got a really colorful design to it. So this is colored, like colored lacquer, colored paint of some kind. I don't know exactly what it is. It's not textured or anything, but as opposed to like a glitter shimmer kind of thing, no, this is just straight up like multi-color kind of paint. And it's got a nice even color dispersion, but every pen's going to be completely different. And the Regatta usually has these like bands that kind of break it up with maybe some kind of carbon fiber in there. But no, this is just the Regatta form factor of pen, but uninterrupted body material. So that was kind of cool. I'm glad we were able to do that. Overall, the pen is good. It's a little weightier pen, you know, slightly bigger, but magnetic cap, which also posts well. Pretty cool overall. Standard International, number 6 size nib. So yeah, it's got a nice grab to it. Pretty cool pen. So Regatta's relatively popular pen, believe it or not, even though it's like, you know, a slightly heavier, slightly larger pen. Pretty popular, and they've done a lot of different colors with these. So this is an exclusive we were able to do. We did a Vega previously in an Invincia. So if that looks kind of familiar, that's why we just did it on this form factor of pen, because we could do it uninterrupted on there. So that was kind of cool. So we have that $92, and yeah, you can go check that out on Goulet Pens. What else we got? And then we have a Sailor Pro Gear. It's called Area 51. So Sailor has undergone some price increases recently, independent of the tariff stuff. So this is going to be a pen at the newer price. So the MSRP on this is $590, which is a bit of a premium for, you know, Pro Gears and what they've been before. We're going to have it for $472, but it's got the 21 karat nib on it, coated in that black ion, so it's all black trim, which looks pretty cool. And this shade of green, I don't think they've done before. I don't know if it has any unique characteristics or anything. It's like, it seems like it should glow or something, but I don't know that it does. I'm not going to promise that. I haven't seen it in person yet, but we're supposed to get it this week. I'm recording this on Monday, so we will see. And it comes with some like alien themed stickers and stuff too. It's kind of fun. So anyway, you can go check that out if you're interested. And you know, we'll have more new stuff coming, but that's what I have at the moment. Let's do a couple company updates and then we'll get into the questions. All right, so I mentioned the LAMY Safari videos already. Go check those out if you haven't seen them yet. And then I'm pretty sure I'll have published another video by the time this goes out, because I'm going to want to do one on the you know, ways to help getting started with your fountain pen. So, you know, it's kind of intended a little bit for like, if you've actually bought from us and what do you do, kind of like a little, not like troubleshooting, but like a steps to do before you like ink it up. If you happen to want to return or exchange it, you know, things to make that, you know, kind of easier to check on the things you need to make sure you got the right thing. But it can be a good video for anybody who's kind of looking to get into fountain pens or whatever. So that's pretty good, short, sweet. So we'll have that one up there. And then, you know, I mentioned price increases a minute ago with like Sailor, but, you know, true to form last week as I was trying to talk about tariffs and price increases and all that stuff, literally I recorded that Tuesday afternoon. And I was like, you know, I don't remember exactly what I said in the video last week. You can go back and watch it and see if I remember correctly or not. But more or less, I said, you know, there hasn't been a lot of price increases to date, you know, but that can be subject to change. And if we're going to find out about them, it's probably going to be, you know, kind of like at the last minute sort of thing. So we can't really run sales so much. Lo and behold, literally the next morning, we get a notice of some price increases that were effective immediately on certain brands. Nothing too significant. This was stuff from like Monteverde, Conklin, and some other ones like Delta, Diplomat. They were not as big, they weren't like 50% price increases or anything like that. Most of them were like 5%, 10%, you know, pretty reasonable. But, you know, from talking to our suppliers, tariffs are starting to hit and they're having to pay more. And it's like, they can't absorb them. So, you know, they're absorbing maybe some of it strategically. It's starting to have an impact a little bit. So don't be surprised if you start to see some price increases happening because the world is changing. So, yep. So again, we're going to have more effective immediately kind of stuff. So to date, we got various products from Monteverde, Conklin, Private Reserve, Delta, Diplomat, Endless Notebooks and Inks, and then Scribo. Those are the ones that have had some price increases that we know of. that have impacted some of the prices already. They're already in effect. Even by the time I'm recording this, we may have more that will come. I'm not going to be able to keep up with all of them, especially because this isn't recorded in a timely enough fashion for that to be super relevant. But yeah, it's just a thing. So I don't like talking about the real world so much in these in these kind of things, because it's like there's enough news out there already. But you know, it is having an impact. We all have to kind of live and deal with these things. And then we did have some price increases from Sailor that came. Some were pretty significant. They weren't our choice. You'll see these across the board. But yeah, from what I understand, Sailor had to increase some prices. The price of gold has gone up like crazy. And then, you know, maybe they just made some strategic choices otherwise to raise prices just to, you know, help buffer their own companies, whatever. I don't know. They don't explain these things to me. We just get handed the prices and say, like, here you go. So, you know, unfortunately, they've had some not insignificant prices increases on some Sailor stuff. So, you know, I'm kind of stuck in the middle. I'm kind of like you guys. I don't really like these price increases either. But, you know, got to do what I got to do. So anyway, that's all I got on that for this week. And let's get into the questions. I got 6 of them for you this week. All right, question number 1. This is from Ramalingaswampudipet. Okay, I'm sorry. I can't pronounce it. Very long name, but thank you for asking the question. What is the point of a fountain pen with a flexible nib? Is that not best done with a dip pen with an oblique pen holder? Well, it depends how you consider best. So, oblique pen holder, what is that? It's basically, it's a calligraphy tool. So it's, you know, you're meant to hold it in your hand. It offsets the nib, and you know, allows you to get really good, like a good angle that would be kind of unnatural for you to write with normally for writing in like that slanted kind of style, and still be able to get line variation and put some pressure on it. And then it's got, you know, spring steel, so really thin steel nibs that are not made to be as permanent like fountain pen nibs. But they're meant to be replaceable, so you can really spring the living daylights out of them, and then you just replace them when you need to. So yeah, I mean, any kind of dip pen that you would use is going to generally get you a better looking writing on paper, arguably, than a fountain pen might, if you're trying to go with like a calligraphy style. So you can get sharper, wider italic nibs. You can get all kinds of crazy designs on nibs that you really can't do well in a fountain pen. And flexing is one thing that like you can definitely get better flex performance on a calligraphy pen than you can with a fountain pen. The trade-off being convenience and speed. So with fountain pens, the whole point of why you would want to flex in a fountain pen is if you want to have some variability to your writing, but you don't want to get full on into calligraphy. So if you're coming from the calligraphy world, you may look at a fountain pen with a flex nib and go, why would I like downstep? Why would I compromise the amazing performance that I see when I use a calligraphy pen? Because you're already used to using it. And I would say, you know, it means you don't have to dip and refill your pen all the time. And you can like carry it with you a little easier and not have to maintain as much. That may or may not matter to you. And if it doesn't, then you probably don't need to get a flex nib fountain pen. It might not be the purpose for you. But most people are not coming from a place where they've used calligraphy pens first. Most people are using ballpoints, roller balls, gel pens, that kind of thing. And then they discover fountain pens, and then with the discovery of fountain pens and, you know, all these different ink choices and nib sizes and stuff like that, then the flex nib is like, oh my gosh, it's like a layer deeper even for most people. That was my experience in the fountain pen world, you know, sort of discovering fountain pens in general first and then discovering flex. And then, of course, I discovered calligraphy stuff, and it was like, oh, that's a whole other thing, you know, different inks, different, you know, nibs, all that kind of stuff. I dabble in that world. I have some materials, but I don't write that way very often. So for me, it was just like from a practicality standpoint, I'm busy, I have kids, I run a business. You know, I'm not sitting down and doing calligraphy, you know, just not, you know, sure I could, but it's just not the thing that I do. So for me, it's less practical to use a dip pen than it is a fountain pen. So, you know, it makes sense for people like in my kind of situation. And that's just a preference thing too. But yeah, I mean, if you want to get the absolute best, finest, and biggest variation of writing and all that kind of stuff, a dip pen is going to be the best way to do that. I'm never going to try to argue that it's not. But, the whole fountain pen flex nib thing is going to be a good compromise between the convenience of having a fountain pen with refillable ink and all that kind of stuff, and having, writing variability like you can get with a flex nib, as you get more in the calligraphy world. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from with that. So, and then also too, it's like you can use fountain pen inks with dip pens, but you really need like a reservoir on it to do it well. You kind of need calligraphy ink, which is generally going to be more opaque because a lot of them are pigment based. They might be shellac or acrylic based. It's not going to shade and sheen as much like a fountain pen ink would. So there are some things that you can get with a fountain pen and the ink that's used that you really have a harder time getting with dip pens. You still can achieve some of those things, but fountain pens in general are just going to shade and sheen just very naturally with the way that they write. So, some of that, if that's what you're going for, that might be a reason to use a flex nib fountain pen as opposed to a dip pen. But, again, it's kind of to each their own. You can kind of cross over and do both if you're interested. But, for more of a regular pen user, pen writer, the flex nib is like a way to sort of dabble into the calligraphy. Same with using a stub nib. You can like sort of play around with calligraphy, but not full on commit to doing it. So there you go. All right, next question. We got Jack A-Lantern says, Jack O-Lantern, but spelled different. Are there any fountain pens that can survive daily sanitization, like for working in a hospital? So I started to do a little bit of a deep dive on this one, and I quickly realized like I don't have enough context to be able to do a very effective deep dive, because I would end up having to do a wide dive and a deep dive. But I can talk about it, a little bit enough to make it worthwhile taking the question. So yeah, long and short is, yeah, sure, you can definitely do that. A lot of times what you see in like, doctors' offices and hospitals, stuff like that, is more disposable pens. So you just use like whatever sanitizing stuff. It doesn't really matter because you're probably going to end up throwing the pen away before you would see any type of degradation due to whatever, bleach or alcohol or whatever the solution might be. There's all different types of sanitizing stuff, which is where the question gets more complicated because, fountain pens have more variety to them than your typical like disposable ballpoint pen might, in terms of the materials that's used for the bodies. And when it comes to plastics, they can really vary a lot in terms of their chemical like properties and resistance to certain chemicals and things like that. So I kind of went with isopropyl alcohol because I feel like that's the more common cleaner. And then like bleach and isopropyl alcohol, they're very different chemically. But in terms of, what impact they have on fountain pens, they're kind of similar. So I will kind of speak to both of those. But anyway, so the first thing I'll say is that it's kind of tough because not all fountain pens tell you what plastic they're made of. But honestly, as I was searching into it, not that many pens. I mean, a lot of them are different materials, but the vast majority of the materials they're made of say like, they can withstand some light, like diluted, temporary contact with alcohols and bleaches. But the longer you do it and the more you're exposed to it, it can harm the pen. So, all this is with a grain of salt. Basically, most of these chemicals you're putting on there may degrade the plastic over time, with some rare exceptions. So first thing I'll say is it is hard because you don't really know which pen is made of what. And then what type of chemical that you're using to sanitize it will change a lot, like what will impact. So it's a combination of basically whatever the pen material is and whatever chemical that you're using to clean it will make a difference. But, pretty much all resins are, they're subject to some kind of solvent breaking them down, and alcohol is a solvent, and bleach has that effect too. So none of them are going to be made better by being in contact with these things. So that said, probably the best bet if you wanted to have sanitization without having negative impact, or minimal negative impact, would be good to go with metal pens. Now, if it's like a finished metal pen, it's really going to depend on the finish. If you got a lacquered pen, it would probably be fine standing up to alcohol, because that that doesn't have much of an impact on it in the short term. You wouldn't want to like soak any of these things in these chemicals, but just wiping it down once a day would probably be okay. But like a raw metal would really be ideal. Specifically, the best pen that you could have would be a solid copper pen, because copper is, antiseptic. It does not, hold on to the whatever stuff like other metals do. So that would really be the best thing. The only problem is copper is pretty dense and heavy. So if you have a solid copper pen, it's probably going to be pretty chunky. And there's just not a whole lot of them out there, and they're generally expensive. So, you could go with other metals too: stainless steel, brass, aluminum, all those types of things. They're going to react less than pretty much most plastics would. So really any metal pen would probably fare better than most any plastic pen over time. But the next one I would say, aside from that, would probably be to go with a pen that's made of ABS plastic, like a LAMY Safari. There's, I'm sure, other pens that are made of ABS plastic. It's hard because I don't really know. Not all manufacturers say, and like different pen models can be made of different plastics too. But I just kind of looked up on our site all the, some types of pens that I know are made of certain materials. So I'll speak to the different types of pen. I think I mentioned this last week or maybe the week before that, like I'm thinking about doing a video on pen materials, and like this is a good example of like where pen materials can actually matter, because they do have different properties and different benefits and trade-offs and stuff like that. So ABS with a Safari I think would probably be best, and then maybe like a polycarbonate, like a LAMY 2000 would do okay. But again, the more exposure you're going to have to any of these over time wouldn't be as ideal. But LAMY 2000 is pretty expensive. Safari is much less expensive. So that's part of why I think Safari would be a pretty good option. I think the plastic would hold up pretty well. It's also, if you drop it or lose it or somebody takes it, you're out a little bit, but not a ton. But then like if it does happen to degrade a little bit over time, you can replace it without too much cost. So that's a good one. Looking at some other plastics, PMMA is one, especially a lot of like higher end injection molded pens. They're made of PMMA, polymethyl methacrylate, in case you're wondering what that is. That can be affected by alcohol, especially if it's like a really clear, like a demonstrator type color. It'll get cloudy, it'll get, it'll get brittle with prolonged exposure to alcohol and stuff like that. So it's like, your mileage may vary on that one. Acrylic acetate, which is most cast resins, is not ideal as well. Kind of in the same boat. Cellulose butyrate, cellulose acetate, like Noodler's pens, those are cellulose butyrate. Cellulose acetate, some higher end pens like that. It's not the best. Cellulose based things, alcohol is a solvent that's used to get them in solution. So the more exposure you have there, definitely don't soak any of these things in these chemicals. But if you wipe it down every now and then, it's going to be okay. But it's you're kind of taking a risk each time you do it. Like it compounds over time. Polystyrene, this is like disposable pens, like Bic Crystal and stuff like that. Some of the cheaper pens, I don't know about, like maybe the Platinum Preppy's made of that. I don't know which plastic that is exactly, but it would make sense to me if it was polystyrene. Also is impacted by alcohol, but that's a really inexpensive pen, so maybe a Preppy would be a decent one to consider. Pilot Varsity might also be decent because it's a disposable pen, very inexpensive. But really, metal is going to be the best, or go with something inexpensive. I looked on Fountain Pen Network and I looked to see like what fountain pens people are using for this type of purpose, for sanitizing. And pretty much everybody was like, yeah, the best thing is just to use a pen that's somewhat more disposable. And then eventually it might get brittle and break, or it's going to get cloudy or crack or something like that. And then you just replace it. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but there's not any like that are going to, and there may be other chemicals too that are used for sanitizing that wouldn't have as much of an impact. But if you have any type of solvent, then it's going to be tough, because all these plastic resins have some kind of solvent base that that they're used to get in their liquid form. So yeah, it's going to get it back to that liquid form, or make it brittle or something if you have it in contact with any other type of solvent and for a long time. So anyway, there's my deep/wide dive for today. Let's move on to the next question. This one's from Michelle T. 007. There are fountain pens that are sold without a clip or a roll stop. And it's a bit annoying to see them rolling down your desk, I would say so. There are rings offered by some vendors, but I found it hard to find them online. Would Goulet Pens ever consider selling these elusive yet desirable items? Like a slip-on roll stop type thing. I mean, there's certain brands that have, slide-on, what's it called, like clips. Kaweco's got some. We've got our Magna Carta Mag 500 that has a slip-on clip too. Not super common, but you do see those. It would be really tough to have something like that that's universal to any type of pen. You're gonna have to have it basically made specifically for a type of pen. So that's not wildly practical. So I'm imagining I've never seen what it is that you're talking about. And I experienced what you mentioned too, which is like, they're really hard to find online. I looked online, I was not able to find anything sort of like what I envisioned you were describing, because I've never seen these things. But I was able to find ones that are made for pencils. Because again, pencils are a more universal shape and round pencils roll off desks. So I was able to find some that are, they're called pencil stops, I think. And you just, kind of slip the pencil into it, and it allows the pencil to not roll off the desk. So imagine you're talking something like that, but I haven't seen any of these things. So I don't know. I would love to know more about those. It's kind of on my radar, so I'll take a look at it. You're the first person I can recall asking me about them, so I don't know if there's something that is desirable for a lot of people, but just hasn't been searched for much online. But it's kind of newer to me, so I was curious. I honestly end up taking this question for the most part because I'm curious and want to learn more and want to gauge interest to see, like, is this something that you all would like to see us source out and try to find? Because, I would need to spend time to do that because it wasn't coming up easily in a Google search for me. So I imagine sourcing one out would not be the easiest thing in the world, but if it is something that is, solving a need that's out there in the pen world, of course, I would love to look into that because, that's what we're here for. So I'm curious, so please, if you have an experience with this, post down in the comments, send me links to, any products that you've seen or whatever that are sort of in that vibe. But yeah, so I'm kind of curious. So thanks for asking the question, and, I'd be curious to learn more. Okay, Mixed Drinks 8100 says, why aren't there more eyedropper pens, especially on bigger pens? I mean, if it's good enough for Namiki Emperor, why not the Sailor King of pens and the Pilot Custom Urushi? Montblanc 149, etc. Seems like less moving parts to fail, aside from some O-ring, maybe larger capacity, etc. No need to clean the nib when filling. Is it so companies can sell more replacement parts like cartridges and converters, etc.? Here we are back to Big Converter, huh? Yes, Big Converter's got their hands around the premium pen community, keeping them from eyedroppering so they can continue to push the converter agenda. No, I don't think that's the case. Honestly, for most of these accessories, it's kind of like, a labor of love for most of the pen companies. Cartridges may be a different story, like disposable cartridges. I don't think they're quite the like high margin item that, like think about Gillette with their disposable razors. That was like, a big thing that like revolutionized the company at the time because people spend so much money on razors. Maybe it's like that for ink cartridges. I don't really know. I don't know people that are like blowing through ink cartridges. And like we have a very heavy fountain pen user crowd. So even people that use cartridges are not like buying them in huge quantities. So it's like, I can't imagine it's making but so much of a financial impact for companies. I think mostly it's pen companies like to offer these cartridges because it's how people want to use the pens and it's convenient to have that as a feature. I don't think it's that they're like just raking in dough from all these cartridge sales, though I could be wrong. I don't really know. It's not our case. We're not raking in tons of money from ink cartridges. We offer them because people want them, and we make a couple of bucks and carry on with our day. It's not like I'm going to retire, in I don't know, Monaco or something because I've been selling ink cartridges. Monaco, right? That's the rich place. I don't know. I know nothing about Monaco. I just thought of that as a rich place. Anyway, let's see here. So basically, why aren't more companies doing it? Well, for one, it's not as popular to do it as probably you might think. especially outside the U.S. A lot of times when we ask our other brand, you mentioned like Sailor, Pilot, Urushi, Mont Blanc, whatever. I don't talk to Mont Blanc, but other manufacturers from like Europe and Japan. They'll come out with a pen and we'll ask like, is it eyedropper compatible? And they're like, I don't know. Like, why would we even check for that? I think it's not a uniquely U.S. thing, but I think here in the U.S. it's cool. We like to be able to do that, and we like big capacity. We like big stuff. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting, but it's we post our pens here. Not as important in other parts of the world. We want to know if everything is eyedroppable as possible. It seems to be more important to us here than at many of the countries where the manufacturers are based. But it is something that like over time we've asked about more, and they take into consideration. The Emperor is kind of its own situation. I know specifically the Emperor, they like the design of the Emperor because it's basically a canvas for that pen, and I think it's very clean. They don't want to put like trim rings and all that kind of stuff on there because they want it to be really, it's like the artwork of the pen that's on there that they want to feature. Now, they could make it a cartridge converter pen. I don't know specifically why they make the Emperor the eyedropper pen that it is, but it is obviously very specifically intended to be so. Sort of like the Opus 88, demonstrator. It's like, it's eyedropper only, and that's the only way you can fill it. Those are two very unique pens in that way. Most other eyedroppable pens are cartridge converter pens that you just happen to be able to eyedropper convert. But in order to eyedropper convert any pen, there's some specific things that you have to have design-wise to be able to do that. You have to have a material that can withstand prolonged exposure to ink inside the whole body of the pen. So you can't have any metal components inside there, which pretty much knocks out a lot of pens because metal components are good for durability and longevity. And so you can't have those. You have to design your pens differently. If you're, because it's like the thinness of the metal and stuff like that. Metal is stronger and denser than any resin. So if you're going to be using a pen that's not going to have internal metal components, you're generally going to have to make parts thicker and chunkier and stuff like that. So, you would have to really change up the design completely on some of these pens and be able to make them eyedropper convertible. It could be done though, but it's like, what would be their motivation in doing that? I don't think the demand is maybe there in their mind to go through that trouble. Namiki, their Emperor, they do it because the pen's all ebonite, and ebonite's relatively strong, so that works, but ebonite's not cheap, and, a lot of other pens, I guess if you're talking pens in like the King of Pens price range and the, Pilot Urushi and custom Urushi, stuff like that, you could theoretically design all of those to be, used of ebonite. But then it's just ebonite. That really limits your material choices because ebonite just does not have nearly as much of a dynamic range of color and design options, unless you're doing a Namiki high-end hand-painted kind of a thing, but that's not something that most pen companies can do, even if they wanted to. Independent makers like Edison and Franklin Christoph and stuff like that, they're using cast resin pens. They're, keeping hardware to a minimum on those pens, generally speaking. So they make those pens so they can be eyedropper converted. So design-wise, you have to have a material that can be, exposed to ink for long times, which is like most resins. But really the only metals that can do that are stainless steel and titanium, gold, but no one's making, gold, like solid gold internal parts for pens. That would be wildly impractical. You have to have a metal that's resistant to any type of corrosion. All of those metals are harder to work and more expensive, so that would drive up the cost even more. And then let's see here, what else? You would not be able to have any like segments on the pen. So you can't have anywhere where there could be a potential leak. So that would be somewhat limiting in certain design aspects too. So, think of like the King of Pens, you got trim rings, you got some other things going on. You couldn't do any of that. You couldn't do, I've got some King of Pens that have like a different finial on the back versus the body color. Say goodbye to all that. You would have to be one solid piece really to be able to be eyedropper convertible. You could theoretically have different segments and just glue it really well or seal it up sometime, but you know, to the best guarantee that you wouldn't have any leaks, it needs to be solid material. So then that can be somewhat limiting as well. Yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say about this one. So a lot of it's just design choices. Like it's technically possible to do these with a lot of things, but you would then see a lot of these high-end pens would end up not that different from each other if that was the driving factor for why they were creating these higher-end pens. And it's just, I think when they're designing the high-end pens like that, eyedropper convertibility falls very low on the list of things that they're trying to accomplish. I think it like more happens to work out for the Namiki Emperor, but you know, for other pens, it's just not the thing that they're trying to solve for the most, and that's why you don't see it very much. But you know, maybe we'll see more in the future. Who knows? Especially if it's something that everybody starts raving about and wants to see it all the time and starts buying them, then you know, what everybody's buying, people, you know, manufacturers are going to make more of. Like that's how capitalism works. So, you know, if manufacturers are coming out with things and then it's not selling, granted, it could be a variety of reasons, they're not going to make more that same way unless it's just cheaper, easier to do it that way. And that's not really the case with any of these eyedropper pens. So anyway, let's go to the next question. All right. So sorry. I'm just going to call it Cammer. Cammer says, I have medium nib LAMY Safaris, All-Stars, Studios, and LX. I've disassembled them from time to time to thoroughly clean them when I'm done using them, specifically after using shimmer inks. Very natural thing to do. Recently, the feed got stuck after my routine through cleaning one of my LAMY All-Stars. Ooh, okay. I know where this is going. It's halfway in and out, and I can't get it to go in or out, so it's stuck. This is because you didn't have it rotated in the very specific way that it needs to be to fit back in there. And if that thing is out of alignment and you shove it in there, it can get jammed in there pretty good. So I feel your pain. I've done it myself. I went to the LAMY store to either help me get it unstuck or to see if it's under warranty. They couldn't get it unstuck either and told me that it's not under warranty because I should not be disassembling the pens to clean. Okay. So I bought a new grip, feed, and nib. They come as a set. My question is, was I given the wrong information, and should it have been under warranty? Also, since I will forever be using shimmer inks because I have a bunch, how should I be cleaning my LAMY pens? It's a great question. So, you're like hitting on so many things that I feel like a broken record when I have to say some things, but it's like, this is exactly why. So first question is, did LAMY, were they incorrect in saying that it was not under warranty? No, I don't think so, because pretty much any pen manufacturer, any type of disassembly beyond the function of uncapping the pen, writing, you know, cleaning, filling, anything outside of that, generally speaking, is going to be outside of warranty coverage because it's not like normal use of the pen. Now, normal to us, many in the fountain pen world of using shimmer inks especially, is you want to disassemble your pen as much as possible. And that makes a lot of sense. So the thing is, like, yeah, you can disassemble your pen all day long, but if you do something, if you have some kind of error and then it causes a problem, pretty much that's not going to be covered under any brand's warranty because that's something that you've done. This is a do-at-your-own risk kind of a thing. And so whenever I'm, you know, I may not be the 100% on this, but when I try to demonstrate taking a pen apart or removing a feed or swapping nibs or something like that, I try to usually say, like, you're taking your pen's life into your own hands when you do this. It should be okay as long as you don't mess anything up. But if you do anything to mess it up, it's not going to be covered because you are doing something beyond what the manufacturer is intending. Warranty should really only cover the pen is working as it should, not you've modified it or altered it or done something to it. And I think, you know, it doesn't seem like you're doing that much to it when you're pulling out a nib and a feed. But if you pull out, you know, if you go to pull out the feed and you rip off one of the fins or you do, you know, you snap the feed in half. I've done all these things before. That's not considered normal use. So they're not going to cover that because a pen didn't defect. You know, you defected essentially. This is not coming from a place of judgment. This is coming from a place of, I've been where you are and I know exactly what you're talking about, but that's the kind of thing like you have to know when you're doing this type of activity that you are going outside of the warranty coverage. And if you end up with a problem, you sort of have to solve it. Now, the thing I would say is like, I've never had a LAMY feed so stuck that I couldn't get it unstuck. So again, this is not official advice because none of this is covered under warranty. This would not be anything returnable or anything like that. But in my case, I'll share my experiences with you, and you glean from it what you will. But when I have gotten feeds stuck or nibs stuck or whatever, which I will do because I'm not going to say careless, but I will often push the boundaries of what I think pens can do because I know people are going to do things, and I want to know what the limits are. I want to know what's a good technique, if it can be avoided, or what you definitely shouldn't do. Removing the LAMY feeds, I will say, is something that is relatively easy to do, and it can go perfectly fine until it doesn't, and then it's a catastrophe, which is exactly what you've experienced. And I know I did a video replacing the LAMY feed, and I know I talked heavily about that in that video, which is exactly your situation. So when I have gotten things stuck like that, when it reaches the point where it's like you've already replaced it, or you're like, I'm going to have to replace it, this thing is not usable as it is. That to me is when I'm like, well, let's just go for broke. I'm going to get this thing out of here by hook or by crook, and I will do my darndest to remove that thing out of there. Now I'm a big guy. I've got strong hands and stuff like that. So I've run into very few things that I've truly not been able to remove. I've broken plenty of things in the process of trying to remove them. But to me, that's like, at that point, you're already into replacement territory. So for me, it's like, okay, I'm going to get this thing out of here. I might destroy the feed. I might destroy something on the grip, but I will have learned something, so I will go through and I'll just kind of rip that thing out of there. Sometimes I will do that, and it was just really jammed in there. I pull it out and I set it in the right way. It seems to perform fine. So it's like you kind of only have, upside to try it out. But, it just, the situation kind of sucks. I feel for you, but it is, anytime you're disassembling a pen like that, even if it's just to clean it more thoroughly, it's like shimmering inks, especially shimmering inks, high sheening inks, these types of things, they fall into this territory where it's like, well, that's not necessarily how fountain pens were designed to handle those things. Yes, they can be used in fountain pens, but you're tempting fate by shoving a bunch of particulates through these very fine feeds. Most of the time, you're not going to have a problem at all. But if you are disassembling it to clean it and stuff like that, you are taking a calculated risk every time you do that. So, just as long as you understand that, you'll be okay. And then every now and then, if you run into something, I'm sure that you're going to be much more careful in the future with these LAMY pens. So honestly, the answer is, if you don't want to pull out your feed anymore on future LAMY pens, just don't. Just flush out the pen as best you can. Use a pen flush. Use whatever like non-mechanical methods that you can, and that's all you can do, really. I mean, if you aren't able or willing to disassemble it, or you just disassemble it way less frequently, you could just do it. Clean it out thoroughly. Don't let it dry out in the pen, and just keep using it. And if it gets to the point where it's like so clogged or so unusable, you're like, well, I might as well disassemble it because the pen's not writing right anymore. Then you just do it and do it really carefully. I mean, what else are you gonna do? But yeah, anytime you're using shimmering inks, again, that is also a situation with like a warranty type of thing that, manufacturers would be like, well, this isn't like a normal ink, especially if it's not like their brand of ink, and that gets into a whole other thing. If you're like using stuff that's not the official, one coming from that manufacturer, it's like, okay, then it wouldn't be covered under warranty, not because it necessarily wouldn't work, but because how are they going to test for every single possible thing out there? That's kind of their logic. So yeah, I would just say, if you want to use these more exciting boundary pushing inks and properties and stuff like that, then just know that you're kind of out there on the edges. You're not going to be covered by typical typical warranty coverage. And just, you're just going to have to be really diligent, really careful not to damage it. But, you know, I take this approach as well. I've ruined some things. It's kind of par for the course. I have a graveyard of various pen parts that I've amassed over the years from such things. And, you know, it's the kind of thing like, you just hang on to parts that you can. Maybe you'll be able to reuse and kind of Frankenstein some parts together in the future. But I am sorry for you. But I would just give that feed a good yank and see what happens. All right, I got one more question here. This is from Marvin Mediocre. Says, I have a traveler's pen, and like you, I would prefer a different nib, extra fine for me. Is there a nib that will fit the pen? The other Brian told me that the Kaweco Sport uses the same nib size, or the same size nib. Although it is the same size, the Kaweco nib is shorter than the Traveler's and isn't long enough to cover the part of the feed that you don't see. All right, so I pulled a couple pens. I want to show you some of what I've got. Again, now we are firmly into, this is not covered by warranty in any way, shape, or form whatsoever, because now we're not just going to be disassembling pens. We're going to be swapping parts across brands. All right, so I got a few pens. Got your Traveler's pen right here. And I'm going to grab a grip too, because it just makes it easier to pull the feeds out of these. Now, I actually did ink this up previously, so I wanted to try pulling it with an inked up nib because, you know, why not? Let's just make a big old mess, right? So let me grab some paper. This is literally was just a Kaweco blue cartridge that I had laying around. I don't know. It just came with a Kaweco pen that I had. This is just a standard international cartridge. There you go. Okay, so it's writing. Cool. So I'm going to pull this out. Use my grip. Pull out the nib and the feed. Voila. Now, normally, if you're swapping nibs, you want to keep it with the feed that it's with. But in this case, we're gonna have to see. We're firmly into experimentation land. Let me wipe off the nib here just so I can show you and compare the nibs next to each other. So, you know, you got general nib shapeness happening here. Nothing too wild. Looks kind of like a number 5 nib if I had to guess. So you got that size. So that's the Traveler's pen. So you asked about a Kaweco. This is an all sport, but it's the same nib size as the classic sport. So pull that out of here, and seeing them next to each other, they don't look the same size. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't necessarily be swapped, because if I look at them kind of on end like this, they look somewhat the same width, but it does look like there's a bit of a harder curve going on here, a bit of a steeper curve going on with the Kaweco one. So I'm going to set that aside because I have a couple others, because I was like, this looks like a number 5. So I grabbed a Benu because they have a Schmidt number 5. So I'm going to pull that out of there and show that next to it. And then I've got this classic vintage, no longer available, Edison Nouveau Encore. This was our follow-up to the Premier way back in the day that had a number 5 size nib. So this is an Edison, which is made by Yovo. So we now have whatever Traveler's is. We have the Kaweco, which may be Bach, I'm not sure, because they use Bach and Yovo and Schmidt across different ones, so I'm not totally sure which one this one is. But then we've got Schmidt for sure and Yovo. So, you know, here the Kaweco one I can see is, you know, one of these things is not like the other one. So, you know, the bottom of it is generally the same size, but the overall size is going to be smaller. Is that going to be a problem? I don't know. We're going to test it out. But if I look and I kind of stack, you know, these nibs, the Travelers, and I stack the Schmidt on top of it, you know, overall size is pretty good. The curvature seems to be pretty close. You know, the Yovo, I'm doing the same thing. The Yovo seems to be the closest match. So I think the Edison would do great. And then the Kaweco, you know, the curvature looks really different. And forgive me if you can't see this fine up a detail on here. It's just not easy to show it. The curvature is a little bit different, but it may or may not work. So what do we want to test out first? Let's go with the Yovo, because I think that's probably our best bet. So I'm going to keep the feed in here that's here, because since we're swapping across brands, I might be able to do the feed, but it may be that the feed won't fit in here. I know the feed fits in with this pen, so I'm just going to try swapping the metal nib part. But that's something you could experiment with further and see if you could do it now. Of course, my feed's going to be my nib's going to be dry, just having it gotten in here. And this is not an extensive test because for the sake of time, I can't really do that. But I don't know, the nib feels secure in there. Seems to be writing fairly consistently. And it looks to me like this is a number 5 size nib. So preliminarily, I would say Yobo number 5 would probably be a pretty good bet. Our Goulet nibs number 5s, those would be the same thing as Edison. So you don't have to buy the whole getup. If you literally just want the metal nib, our Goulet nibs would be the best thing for you. And we have those in extra fine. So not just trying to do a self-plug there, but that actually really would probably be the most practical thing for you to do for this particular pen. In fact, I don't know why I didn't try that before myself. I was curious. That's why I wanted to take this question. Let me try the, that's the Travelers. We know that one works. Let's try the Kaweco because that's really the other one. The Schmidt one I think would probably do fine. But let's do the Kaweco one. So it is not fitting in quite as easily. Again, because the curvature is a little different. Now let me see if it like spins if I need to get it in a certain direction or something. Okay. So I've got it pressed in there, and actually you could do a lot worse than this. That fits in there kind of okay. I don't know. I haven't tried. I mean, I tried briefly before I sat down to do this video to fit in there, but I've never tried inking up and writing with the Kaweco nib on here. I mean, it's writing. This actually is an extra fine nib too, just so happens. So it felt like it took a little more pressure to kind of get it in. But, I mean, it looks to be writing to me. Over time, I don't know. We would have to see how that works, but signs are pretty good so far that that actually works. Even though the nib is kind of a different size overall, you know, it's really just like the overall length that's kind of different. So it's just not, it's not in as far, but it's not like loose in here as it is. Maybe if I really tried, I could shove it in a little bit more, but I don't, it's going to be hard to do that anyway because the curvature makes it tough. So yeah, I would say that that unofficially fits. And yeah, I mean, all these other ones work, so I'm sure the Schmidt one as well. I'm just going to test it more or less for formality at this point. But I think that's going to fit on there just fine. And then I'm going to have very blue hands the rest of the day after doing all this. So I'm trying to force a little ink down to get it into my nib. There we go. Oh yeah, this has got that's a fine nib, so there you go. So it's a wetter fine. There you go. I mean, that one's writing, seems to be writing pretty normal. So yeah, all of these fit. So yeah, I would say the Kaweco could technically fit. It's not the best fit of all of them. But a Yobo number 5 would really be the ideal thing to do, which probably actually would be the most practical thing for you to get. So yeah, there you go. Thanks for the question. That was really interesting to test those out and see which works. This is the tough thing about, you know, we can't really have a filter on our site to say all this stuff because it's like, well, it sort of fits, sort of doesn't. It's very unofficial. We can't, you know, promise anything, especially because like if you go swapping these parts around, you might ruin the feed, you might do all these crazy things, but it's a do at your own risk sort of situation. But yeah, I've had pretty good results here today. So take for this what you will, do at your own risk, put your pen's life into your own hands, and just go nuts and have fun because life's short. All right, it's pen spotlight time. This is gonna be kind of brief because I'm covering a pen that, or brand at least, that's really well known. The pen itself is not that new. It's really just a different color, but it's a pen that we don't get to show anything new very often. It's the TWSBI Precision, the one that everybody always forgets about. So this is the original Precision, which has not changed or have any update to it in 8 years. So, you know, it's a nice pen. It's got a brushed metal, you know, kind of finish to it. It's like a gunmetal type of color. It is piston, just like, you know, most other TWSBIs that you love and know. And it has an ink window, so that is cool. It's not the same, like, you know, thing with most other TWSBIs that you get to see the ink sloshing around all the time. But it is nice. You get to see the, you know, facets. It's got a hexagonal thing going on because that is kind of a TWSBI thing as well, like on the Eco. Number 5 size nibs, similar to what you get on the 580. A little bit bigger nib. And number 4 is on the Eco and the Classic and stuff like that. So overall, good pen, $80. It's been that way ever since it came out. But we got a new color. This is Gemini Blue. So I just wanted to show you what that looks like. If you haven't seen the packaging, especially for the Precision, you're like, what packaging does that come in? It comes in the same packaging that the 580 comes in, basically. So here it is. So if you have any 580s, you're very familiar with this packaging. You know, get it out of its little foam cocoon there. Now I have opened this up already because this is my personal pen, but you know, you can sort of see what's going on. It's got your little, you know, little whatever display stand going on there, and then, you know, like other TWSBIs, if you haven't seen, I don't show packaging a lot because a lot of it changes, but then you got your silicone grease and your wrench under here. So it is wrenchable. So that's kind of neat. TWSBI is one brand that if you do go messing with some of the parts, they are more gracious than most other brands. You know, I mean, they give you the tools. They kind of invite it, right? Anyway, so here is Gemini Blue. Nice looking color. It's like a denim blue kind of color. So I really like it. And then what's really cool too is it's got, you know, it's got the facets, but then on the high points of the facets here, like on the corners, it's machined away and it's like a polished aluminum there. So the overall pen is like the same weight and same dimensions and everything as the original 580. It's just straight up a different color. But it is really cool because the blue color looks nice. It's not as brushed as the original, but it's still got a little bit of kind of a powdery kind of matte finish to it, just slightly. And then it's got those little facets too. So you don't really feel any texture difference between the two. Not really anything significant. And then it's got just a matte blue kind of grip going on there. So it looks really nice. It's tough. Do I like it more than the original? I don't know. What do you think? It's different for sure. And it has, like, I don't know, the gunmetal look with the chrome, like that looks very precision. But I don't know. I've looked at this pen for 8 years. You know, this is going to feel more precision-like to me because this is what I've known as the Precision. But what does look really precise is the way that these things are machined right here, like the finish on the blue that goes to the aluminum. Like that looks pretty sharp and looks cool. So I do dig that. Same price, same nib size options and everything that you have. So I'm very curious to see what you all think, how popular it is. Yeah. But that's the Gemini Blue. We have it now, $80, same as the original price. I believe this is a special edition though. And I don't know how long it's going to be around. You know, TWSBI has done a bunch of special editions before. Sometimes they're around for like 9 months or a year. Sometimes they're around for many years. So I don't know what the Precision is going to do. Precision is not a very high volume selling pen, so I don't know what quantities they made though. So it could be they're around for a while because not that many people are buying them. Or it could be that like, wow, this is the pen that gets, you know, the Precision on everybody's radar and it's just going to fly off the shelves. I doubt that. But I don't know. Let me know what you think. I'm into it though. I dig it. But then again, well, I have too many pens and I love pens. So yeah, let me know what you think. And that's the Precision. All right, Brian's adventure time here. I'll make this fairly brief because I've, you know, had some family time this weekend. Rachel's family came into town. We got to see them. That was cool. So we just did a bunch of family stuff. Nothing too wild. And, you know, I try not to share deep details about other people in my life because, you know, they're not crazy like me and put themselves out there all the time. But I can talk about a little bit. I was sick last week. You could tell I'm still kind of getting over it, but I'm basically back to normal. So that was nice to get some sense of normalcy back in my own voice and my own energy. I showed you last week the picnic table that I was power washing and cleaning for our team here. I did get the sealant finished on there. I got it back here. Everybody's enjoying it. It worked out really well. What I actually ended up doing for that after I cleaned it was, you know, because it was, this thing's got to be, well, I mean, we moved in this building 8 years ago and it was already here when we moved in. So, you know, it's at least 8 years old, but it looked pretty old even when we moved in. So I would say 10 years minimum, probably closer to 15 years old, this table. Still solid though. I fixed the legs because they were making contact with the ground and were starting to rot a little bit. So I fixed those. And then, you know, the surface had just like weathered a bit and the wood had splintered some because it had never been finished or anything. I sanded some of it, but actually what I ended up doing was removing the boards and just flipping them over and it was almost like they were brand new. I still sanded those, but that actually gave like the surface of the table basically a brand new look just by flipping the boards over. So that was a cool little life hack. It was just a few nails I had to pull up. I flipped it over and put it down with screws so it'd be more secure. I did a opaque sealant over top of it because that is the stuff that holds up the best. Yeah, I've sealed many decks, fences, patio furniture, things like that over my lifetime. And now I've got one more under my belt. So that worked out really well. I enjoyed doing that. And then let's see here. Oh yeah, with the family visiting, I forgot to mention, we played some board games and stuff like that. Apples to Apples has been a family favorite recently, if you're familiar with that. We watched a little bit of, there's an app called Dropout, if you're familiar with that at all. If you've ever seen the on YouTube, if you've seen the show Actually, those are the people that do that. That's one of the shows on Dropout. So I hadn't really watched that before, but there's a really show called Game Changer that was just phenomenal. So anyway, so watch that. So it's more like kind of nerd stuff. So if you're really into musicals and, RPG games and that kind of stuff, it's this is your content. So that's kind of cool. And they do a lot of improv stuff on there. So they're very talented. They do a lot of great stuff. So I'm curious to check that out a little bit more because it seems like there's some content that's it's like a totally different world than Netflix and Hulu and stuff like that. But it's $6 a month or whatever. I have no affiliation with them whatsoever, but enjoyed watching them this weekend. And the most interesting thing that we probably ended up doing, aside from taking my niece and nephew on my tractor and riding in the bed of our pickup truck around our yard just because it's fun, because they're from a more suburban area and we're out in the country. So it's they get to do the country things when they go and visit us. But one of the country things we get to do is woodworking. And my niece, bless her heart, she has a lot of creative ideas and things she wants to do. She wanted to make a squirrel house, like a bird house, but for squirrels. And I was like, okay, interesting. We had sort of brainstormed that a little bit. I have a book of kid woodworking ideas, and they had this squirrel sort of lounge chair, squirrel patio furniture more or less. And you can stick a corn cob on it and you can watch them eat it at the picnic table kind of a thing. So that's kind of what we wanted to do. So, I took inspiration from the thing I made for Ellie out of the red cedar. And so I still had some of that cedar wood. So I was like, that's actually a good outdoor wood. I was like, we could make, not really a squirrel house because squirrels don't really live in houses like that. But I was like, and you want to be able to see them. So I was like, we could make a squirrel platform, I guess, and hang it on a tree, and then you can put food up there and whatever and watch the squirrels and see what they do. So we did that. We made a lounge chair, sort of like a beach lounger, and then a picnic table for the squirrels. So it's more I called it a squirrel diorama because that's kind of what it ends up looking like. But anyway, I've got pictures and you can see what it looks like. It turned out really good. Nice little thing that we could knock out just in a weekend project together. So that was really fun and cool memories to do with my niece. And that was fun. So the family got a kick out of that. And also it smells like a hamster cage because that's what that wood smells like. So that's it. That's what I've been up to recently. Had a good time. And we're going to wrap this up, but I got a fun fact for you about squirrels. So we'll cover that in just a second. All right, I want to thank you for watching. Leave me some feedback. Let me know how I'm doing. Ask me future questions, stuff like that. Part of the thing I love the most with the feedback is I'm talking about something here. Y'all are correcting me most of the time because, I'm just one guy. I can't know everything. And so that's cool to get that kind of feedback. You're asking me questions, giving me ideas, all that kind of stuff. I can respond in comments, which I try to do. It's hard. I don't have so much time, but I love doing that. So keep engaging with me. I love that. And then of course, fountain pens, stuff that you need, Goulet Pens, check out our website for all that good stuff. And then we'll close out this week with some fun facts about squirrels. So squirrels can find food that's been buried beneath a foot of snow. That's pretty cool. They got a nice little sense of smell there. Their front teeth never stop growing. So that's kind of interesting. I think hamsters are the same way too. That's why they're always chewing on stuff is because, their teeth are regenerative. And then how squirrels are always diving and zigzagging and stuff like that. That's to help them escape predators like hawks. So by zigzagging, they're able to kind of stay a little bit more erratic and you can't hone in so easily on where they're going to go. So that's actually a evolutionary thing or whatever. It's a strategic thing they do. Very much works to their disadvantage with cars though. And then they bury a lot of nuts and stuff like that. They're known for doing that a lot. They create tons of holes in my yard, which is fun. But 25% of the food that they hide and bury is going to be stolen by other animals or maybe other squirrels even. So they're getting thieved upon quite regularly. And in order to help combat that, apparently it's not very effective because it's still getting 25% of the stuff stolen. But squirrels will often frantically dig a hole and then just bury it without actually putting anything in there, just to throw off would-be thieves. I don't know. In their squirrel brain, I guess that makes sense. And then they often don't remember where they buried all their food, which, is actually part of a very symbiotic relationship they have with especially oak trees, where they get their acorns and stuff because, anything that they're burying to hide, food for the winter and stuff like that, if they forget about it or whatever, or the thing germinates before it gets eaten, well, now they've literally just seeded a new tree. So it actually works quite well for for the trees. They have a good symbiotic relationship there. And, when squirrels are looking for the nuts, like especially those acorns, for the nuts that they find, they give them a good shake, just like, in like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Like there's something to that. So they will shake the nut to see basically if the nut's any good, if there's any like weevils or anything like that that's like infiltrated it. If the nut's like not as good for whatever reason, I don't know what exactly what they're looking for, but if the nut seems like it's not as good and not as hardy and not going to make it through the winter, they will eat that nut right away. And then if it's a good solid nut, then they will bury that one because it's more likely to make it through the winter. So, they're thoughtful about these things, almost as if their life depends on it. So that's kind of neat. But I thought that was kind of fun, kind of interesting. Squirrels are fascinating creatures. So yeah, anyway, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week on Q&A. Right on.